The story today is haunting enough to leave a quiet ache in your chest, unfolding beneath a wide western sky, heavy with dust and silence. It's a place where broken lives cross paths, where fate tightens its grip without warning. It begins with a single refusal, small, almost dismissible, yet powerful enough to unravel secrets buried deep at ashen vows. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The long shadow of the Black Hills stretched across the land like a bruise that never quite healed. In that shadow lived a man called Rowan Pike, 29 years old, balanced uneasily between two worlds that had never fully claimed him. Born of a Cheyenne mother and a white father, he belonged completely to neither. He moved through life the way smoke drifts through timber, quiet, watchful, leaving little trace behind him. People said he was a ghost, and Rowan never bothered to deny it. Years earlier, he had been something else entirely, a Union sharpshooter, a man whose steady hands could end a life from distances most men could barely imagine. Back then, death had come to him clean and precise, carried on the pull of a trigger. Now, those same hands split firewood, patched fences, and avoided the weight of a rifle. Long scars crossed his back, hidden beneath shirt sleeves, while deeper scars cut through his soul, unseen but ever present. He had sworn an oath never to hold a gun again, convinced he had spent his last right to peace. Into this silence came Lorne Avery, 24 years old, colliding with Rowan's solitude like a sudden gust of cold wind. She was a woman of ink and paper, raised among shelves and ledgers back east, an archivist from Boston, whose hands knew parchment far better than rope or reins. Dust and mud clung awkwardly to her boots, yet she carried herself with purpose. Many mistook her calm for fragility. They were wrong. Beneath her composed exterior lived a will as unyielding as iron. Lorne had crossed thousands of miles alone, driven by a single, unrelenting truth. Her twin brother, Silas Crow, was not dead, no matter what the world insisted. Officials claimed he had vanished. Others said he'd simply moved on. Lorne knew better. This was the story of what happens when a man who has abandoned life meets a woman who refuses to surrender it. A story about scars, both visible and hidden, and the unlikely hands that help mend them. The year was 1876, and Deadwood was less a town than a raw wound torn into the earth. It had been hacked from the Black Hills by men drunk on gold and desperation, their boots sunk deep in mud and ambition alike. The air hung heavy with the stench of sweat, damp timber, and crushed stone. Noise ruled everything, the relentless pounding of stamp mills, the shouts of mule skinners, the sudden crack of gunfire echoing like an erratic heartbeat through the streets. In a place like this, mercy was rare, and silence was often the only shield left to those who carried too much of the past within them. The shouts of mule skinners echoed down the street, cut through by the sudden crack of pistol fire that snapped the night apart, like an uneven heartbeat. Into that raw chaos stepped Lorne Avery. She didn't belong there. It showed in the way she held herself, shoulders drawn high, posture tight, as if bracing against the town itself. Her traveling dress was plain gray wool, practical and unadorned, sewn for long journeys rather than attention. And it was clean. That alone set her apart, a sharp contrast to the grime-darkened hems of every other skirt in the territory. She clutched a leather satchel to her chest, as though it held a fortune. In truth, it carried something far more precious: a bundle of letters and a hand-drawn map. Lorne was 24, raised among shelves and ledgers in Boston, a woman shaped by libraries and quiet rooms. Her fingers bore stains of ink, not soil. As she stepped down from the stagecoach, she ignored the crude calls thrown her way by drunken miners sprawled along the boardwalk. Her gaze cut through the street with unsettling focus. She hadn't come chasing gold. She had come hunting a ghost. Her twin brother, Silas Crow, had vanished into these hills. A surveyor by trade, one of the rare men who studied the land for what it was, not what could be torn from it. His letters had once arrived every week, filled with careful notes about jagged peaks and the deep, reverent silence of the canyons. Then, 3 months earlier, the letters stopped. The mining company claimed he'd quit. The government said he'd moved on. But Lorne knew Silas. He was her other half, the last family she had left in a world that had grown hard and distant. He would never disappear without a word. She spent her first hour in Deadwood, inside the marshal's office. It was cramped and thick with smoke, the air sour with stale tobacco and indifference. Marshal Orson Bale sat behind his desk, a man whose drooping mustache mirrored his heavy eyelids. He didn't bother to rise when she entered. He glanced over her papers, studied her pale face, and released a weary sigh that rattled deep in his chest. "Miss Avery," he said, his voice soaked in tired condescension. "Men go missing in these hills every day. Maybe a bear took him. Maybe he found a better claim up in Montana. Maybe he didn't want to be found." "Silas isn't just a man," Lorne replied, her voice controlled despite the faint tremor in her hands. "He's a surveyor for the territorial government. He was mapping the northern ridge. Someone has to know where he camped." The marshal gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Take a look around. Nobody here knows a thing unless there's money in it. This isn't a place for a lady with soft hands." He waved her off without another glance. "Go back to Boston. Go back to your embroidery. Let the dead stay dead." Lorne didn't argue. She simply turned and walked out, jaw set, already knowing she would not be leaving this town until she found the truth. Or it found her first. He turned back to his ledger, dismissing her the way she had been dismissed her entire life. Too delicate, too emotional, too much a woman to grasp the hard truths of the world. But Lorne Avery carried a truth of her own. Beneath the plain gray wool dress and the careful manners learned back east lived a resolve tougher than the boardwalk planks beneath her boots. She didn't leave town. She stepped out of that office with her chin lifted. She went to the one place in Deadwood where truth could be bought cheap, the saloon. It took 3 long hours and $5 hard in silver before the one-eyed bartender finally leaned in close and gave her a name. Grit Fenlow spoke low, his voice rough as sandpaper. There was only one man who knew the northern ridges well enough to follow a ghost. Folks called him the Spirit Walker, he said. Most just called him Rowan Pike. Half Cheyenne, half white. A man of few words. Living beyond the sawmills, where the town thinned out and the forest reclaimed the land. Fenlow warned her not to go. Rowan didn't welcome visitors, especially the kind who asked questions. Lorne didn't hesitate. She pulled her shawl tight against the cutting wind and left the mud-choked main street behind. As she walked, Deadwood's clamor faded, replaced by the soft hiss of wind threading through ponderosa pines. The air sharpened, colder with every step. She walked until her boots were caked with mud, until a small cabin came into view, tucked against a granite rise. The structure was plain, rough logs sealed with moss, but the ground around it was swept clean, deliberate, ordered. And there he was. Rowan Pike, splitting firewood in the dying light of afternoon, his back turned to her. For a moment, Lorne simply stood and watched. He'd stripped off his shirt, despite the chill, skin darkened and slick with sweat. It wasn't his strength that stole her breath. It was the history carved into his body. Scars crossed his broad back, some jagged and wild, the mark of shrapnel from the war, others thin and pale, too precise to be anything but a whip. He swung the axe with a steady, frightening rhythm. Crack! The log split. Crack! He never looked back. Yet she knew he sensed her. He moved with a predator's awareness, attuned to every shift of air. "Mr. Pike," she called. The axe fell one last time, biting deep into the stump. The silence afterward pressed in hard, ringing in her ears. Rowan straightened slowly, wiped his brow with his forearm, and turned to face her. His features a sharp collision of the bloodlines that had shaped and scarred him. High cheekbones and eyes the color of dark obsidian sat beneath a brow forever drawn tight, as if warning the world to keep its distance. He said nothing. He simply stared at her. That look cut through the illusion of her city clothes and neat posture, peeling them away until it found the fear she worked so hard to hide. He bent, lifted another split log, tossed it onto the pile, and turned back to his work. He was dismissing her. Lorne Avery stepped closer, her boots crunching softly through pine needles. "I was told you can track anything in these hills," she said. "I was told you're the best." Thwack! Another log burst apart beneath the axe. "I have money." Her voice lifted despite her effort to keep it steady. She opened her satchel and drew out a small leather pouch. $50. Gold, just to guide me to the northern ridge. Rowan Pike didn't slow, didn't glance her way. The steady rhythm of his chopping formed a wall she couldn't climb. The indifference burned. It felt deliberate. But Lorne forced a breath and understood something important. Money held no power over a man who lived like this. He wasn't starving for coin. He was starving for isolation. She moved closer, her tone dropping, the edge of negotiation falling away. "The marshal told me to go back to my embroidery," she said quietly. "He thinks my brother is dead, thinks Silas Crow is just another fool who slipped off a cliff." The axe stopped. It rested on the block. Rowan didn't turn, but she knew he was listening. "He's my twin," Lorne whispered, tears finally burning at the corners of her eyes. "We don't exist without each other. If he were dead, I would know it. I know he's out there. I know he's hurt. I'm not asking you for a service. She swallowed, and met his silence head on. "I'm asking you because you look like a man who knows what it means to be left behind." Slowly, Rowan turned. This time he truly looked at her. He saw the tremor in her mouth, the white-knuckled grip on her satchel. He didn't see a wealthy traveler or a foolish outsider. He saw the same hollow ache that stared back at him every morning from the mirror. A soul torn loose and searching. He set the axe aside and stepped toward her, moving without sound, like smoke drifting across timber. Lorne fought the urge to retreat. He was imposing, dangerous even, carrying the scent of pine sap and old sweat. Still, she held her ground. Rowan reached into the pocket of his rough canvas trousers and pulled free a small bundle wrapped in deer hide. He extended it toward her. Lorne's hands trembled as she accepted it and unfolded the leather. Inside lay a brass surveyor's compass, its glass cracked into a spiderweb of fractures. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the glass, splintering the needle beneath it. On the brass casing, just below the rim, a dark stain clung to the metal. Dried, rust-colored. Blood. Silas Crow. Lorne gasped, her legs weakening as recognition struck hard. She turned the compass over and saw the engraving carved into the back. S.C. Her breath caught in her throat. Rowan Pike spoke at last. His voice came out low and rough, like stone dragged beneath a boot heel, unused and heavy with restraint. "I found it 3 days ago, near Devil's Tower Pass." "Is he—" Lorne couldn't finish the question. There was no body, Rowan said, but there were tracks, horses, iron-shod. Men who didn't want to be followed. He glanced toward the mountains, eyes narrowing against the distant ridgelines. Your money won't help you here, Miss Avery. The mountains don't care about gold. They only answer to survival. Will you take me? She asked, pressing the broken compass to her chest. Please. Rowan looked down at her. He saw the softness of her hands, the impractical cut of her dress. He knew she would slow him down. Knew taking her into that country meant risk that could fracture the solitude he had sworn to protect. Yet he also knew the blood on that compass belonged to an innocent man, and the tracks he'd seen were left by riders who killed without reason. He saw her resolve. That unbending spine beneath her calm. Be here at dawn, Rowan said, already turning back toward the cabin. Bring warmer clothes. Leave the dress in Boston. As Lorne walked back toward town, the compass clenched tight in her fist. A realization settled deep within her. Deadwood had named him a ghost. Some had called him a savage. But standing against the darkening tree line, Rowan Pike looked nothing like a monster. He looked like a man who had built a fortress of silence not to keep the world out, but to keep his own demons contained. As the sun sank behind the jagged black hills, staining the sky in violent purples and reds, Lorne felt it in her bones. Finding her brother was only the beginning. Two worlds had collided. The ordered world of ink and records, and the brutal world of blood and earth. Neither would emerge unchanged. Men like Rowan existed everywhere. People scarred so deeply they raised walls of silence too high to see over. Not from hatred, but from fear of letting anything inside again. And women like Lorne had stood in rooms where they were dismissed, told they were incapable, underestimated at every turn. She had not raised her voice. She had not broken. She had endured. She didn't argue with the marshal or collapse into tears in the snow. She simply endured. There was a deep, quiet strength in a woman who refused to be pushed aside. Lorne Avery showed that power didn't require clenched fists, only a steady heart and the will to stand firm. As they rode deeper into the Black Hills, the world of men slipped away behind them. The pounding of stamp mills and the shouts of miners dissolved into a silence so complete it pressed against the ears. Out here, the land ruled all. Mountain peaks ripped at the sky like broken blades, while the valleys lay cool and dark, heavy with the scent of ancient pine and damp earth. For the first 2 days, they spoke little. The journey found its rhythm in the beat of hooves and the low wind threading through canyon walls. Lorne watched Rowan Pike with a fascination she didn't bother to hide. In town, he had been an outcast, feared, pitied, avoided. Out here, he was something else entirely. Here, he moved like a man born to the ground beneath his boots. It wasn't just skill. It was fluency. Rowan didn't wrestle the wilderness. He understood it. When the sun dipped low, he didn't search for shelter. He simply knew where the wind would break against stone. With quick, practiced strokes of his knife, he stripped bark and coaxed a fire to life. Clean, low, nearly smokeless. He set simple snares of twine and caught rabbits, dressing them with a precision that was harsh, yet strangely graceful. No movement wasted, no breath spared. Lorne, by contrast, fought her own body every mile. The first day left her thighs raw from the saddle, her back aching as though she'd hauled the horse herself. Her fine leather boots, made for paved streets, slipped on loose shale. At night, the cold crept into her bones, shaking her so hard her teeth rattled. Rowan watched her closely, waiting for complaints. He expected tears, expected her to demand they turn back, to realize a woman of books had no place in this brutal country. But the protests never came. When she stumbled, she rose. When her hands split and bled from gathering firewood, she tore a strip from her petticoat and bound them without a word. On the third evening, clouds rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the moon. The faint trail, sign left by the men who had taken her brother, vanished into a maze of stone ridges. Rowan reined in his horse, jaw tightening. For the first time since they'd left Deadwood, uncertainty crossed his face. "The trail's gone," Rowan Pike muttered. The words meant more for the wind than for her. "Without the moon, we won't see the ridgeline. We'll lose a full day." Lorne Avery eased her horse up beside his. She tilted her face toward the black ceiling of sky, where a tear in the clouds revealed a faint scattering of light. Drawing closer, she raised a gloved hand and pointed upward. "We don't need the moon," she said, her voice steady in the thin air. "See that cluster? Cassiopeia. And there, low on the horizon, the handle of the Dipper. If we follow the line between them, it leads straight north to the pass." Rowan looked at her, then lifted his gaze to the stars. He knew the ground, every root, every stone, but the sky had always been nothing more than weather to him. To her, it was a chart. "You rid the stars," he said, real surprise roughening his voice. "My father was a navigator," Lorne answered quietly. "I learned the sky before I learned books. We go left, Rowan, through that notch." He studied her for a long moment, weighing what he saw. She wasn't just baggage anymore. She had purpose. He dipped his chin once, sharp and decisive, and turned his horse left. It was the first time he let her lead. The balance between them shifted the following afternoon at the Whitewater River. Snowmelt thundered through the channel, the water gray and violent as it slammed over slick, moss-smeared stones. One wrong step could shatter a leg or drag a rider under in seconds. "Keep your eyes on the far bank," Rowan shouted over the roar. "Don't look down." "Your stash." He crossed first, his horse scrambling but holding its footing. Reaching the far side, he turned just in time to see Lorne halfway across when her mare stepped on a rolling stone. The animal reared, hooves flailing. Lorne was thrown sideways, her boot snagging in the stirrup for a breathless instant before she kicked free. She hit the river hard. The cold seized her, wrenching her downstream toward a nest of jagged rocks. She gasped, swallowing ice-cold water, arms thrashing for purchase. Rowan was off his horse in a heartbeat. He didn't swim. He drove forward, forcing his way through the waist-deep current like a charging bull. As the river tried to pull her under, his hand locked around her forearm. The grip was iron. He hauled her up, dragging her soaked, shuddering body against his chest to brace them both against the rushing water. For an instant, the world stopped. Lorne, choking for breath, was pressed tight against him, the river raging around them as if they were the only two souls left alive. She was soaked through, trembling, yet she could feel the heat of him even through his wet shirt, the frantic pound of his heart slamming against her own. His arm locked around her waist, holding her with a force that bordered on desperation. When she lifted her face, his was only inches away. His eyes were wide, dark, stripped of all guard. He wasn't looking at her the way a guide looks at a client. He was looking at her like a man staring at the edge of something precious slipping away. The moment stretched. Electric. Terrifying. Intimate. Then Rowan Pike blinked, and the wall slammed back into place. He pushed her away hard enough to stagger her, half dragging her toward the muddy bank before letting go as if her skin burned him. He stepped back, chest heaving. "Get dry," he snapped, voice sharp, already turning away. "We don't stop for long." He was angry. Lorne Avery understood that much. Not at her, but at himself. He was frightened of his own gentleness. That night, the silence between them changed. It wasn't the hollow quiet of strangers anymore. It was dense, charged, crowded with words left unsaid. They made camp beneath a rocky overhang to break the wind. The fire crackled low, throwing long, restless shadows across the stone. Lorne sat near the flames, drying her hair, watching Rowan tend to his rifle. He did it every night, the same ritual, breaking the weapon down, oiling the metal, fitting each piece back together with blind, practiced precision. But he never loaded it. "You handle that rifle like it's part of you," Lorne said softly into the dark. "But you never hunt with it. You use a bow. Why?" Rowan's hands stilled. He stared into the fire, the flames flickering in his obsidian eyes. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "I was with the first sharpshooters," he said at last, his voice low, rising from somewhere deep and buried. "During the war, my job wasn't to fight. It was to erase officers, generals, men on horseback 1,000 yards out who never knew they were in danger." He looked down at his hands, large, scarred, steady. They called it a skill, a gift. The fire popped. He swallowed. "After Antietam, I understood it wasn't a gift. It was a curse." He lifted his eyes to her then, and the pain there was so raw it nearly stole her breath. "I never missed, Lorne. Not once. I didn't stop shooting because I lost my aim. I stopped because I never missed." His gaze dropped back to his hands. "There's too much blood on them to ever touch anything clean again." "That's why I live out here," Rowan Pike said quietly. "That's why I'm a ghost. Ghosts don't hurt anyone." The words settled between them, heavy with years of punishment he had chosen for himself. He waited for her revulsion, waited for her to pull her blanket close and turn away. Instead, Lorne Avery moved. She crossed the small space between them without hesitation and took his hand, the hand he believed was soaked in death, and cradled it between her own pale palms. Rowan flinched, trying to pull back, but she held fast. Her skin was warm, her grip steady. "Look at me, Rowan," she said softly. He raised his eyes, cornered, like an animal braced for a blow. "War is a terrible thing," she whispered. "It takes good men and twists them into shapes they don't recognize. But you are not a ghost, you're flesh and blood. You saved me today." She tightened her hold, her thumb tracing the scar on his knuckle. "These hands pulled me from the river. They built this fire. They're guiding me to my brother. You are not what you did yesterday. You are not the war. You are what you choose now, who you decide to be in this moment." Rowan stared at their joined hands. For 10 years, he had believed himself a monster beyond redemption. Yet sitting there, feeling the impossible warmth of her touch against his calloused skin, something cracked inside him. The ice around his heart began to give. He didn't pull away. He stayed where he was, breathing in the scent of rain and wood smoke. For the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to feel the presence of another human being. Rowan had spent his life measuring himself against his past, against the things he'd done to survive, and deciding he was unworthy of love. He believed his scars, those carved into his back and those buried in his soul, made him monstrous. He saw only failure when he looked inward, only moments he wished he could erase. He had convinced himself that if anyone truly knew him, they would leave, but scars were not proof of ugliness. They were evidence that life had tried to break him and failed. Rowan wasn't afraid of the wilderness. He wasn't afraid of the men hunting them. He was afraid of Lorne, afraid because she offered no judgment, only forgiveness. And when someone has spent a lifetime condemning himself, forgiveness is the most frightening thing of all. Accepting it meant laying down a burden carried for so long, it had become part of who he was. The smell reached them before anything else. It wasn't the clean bite of pine or the dry musk of sage anymore. The air carried something sweet, thick with copper, and wrong. When they crested the ridge overlooking the surveyor's camp, the truth struck like a blow. Lorne Avery gasped, the sound swallowed whole by the canyon's vast throat. The camp was gone. What remained was a graveyard of canvas and ash. Tents had been slashed and burned. Surveying gear, brass instruments, tripods, measuring chains, lay shattered against the rocks, scattered like broken toys tossed aside in a fit of cruelty. They descended the slope without a word, Rowan Pike in the lead, bow drawn, eyes cutting the horizon for movement. The killers were gone. They had left only the quiet of the dead. Lorne found the papers first. They were strewn across the dirt, ground into the earth by iron-shod hooves. As she gathered them, her hands shook, the truth assembling piece by piece. These were not simple maps of ridges and valleys. They were geological surveys. Gold, thick veins of it, running deep through the heart of treaty land the government had sworn would belong to the tribes forever. At the bottom of a half-burned letter, a name surfaced: Bram Lockridge, railroad baron, a man who worshipped progress as a god that demanded blood. Lockridge wasn't laying track. He was erasing a border. He was killing anyone who knew the truth about the gold. If it was proven to lie on Indian land, the law said it belonged to the tribes. But if the surveyors vanished, if the maps disappeared, the land became empty wilderness, free for the taking. They didn't just kill them, Lorne whispered, clutching the papers. They erased them. Rowan didn't answer. He crouched near a dark splash on a flat rock, touched it once, then pointed toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, hidden behind scrub oak. Someone crawled, he said. One man, dragging his leg. They found Silas Crow in a shallow cave 300 feet up the canyon face. He was pale, fever-bright, delirious. His leg was bound with a shirt stiff from dried blood. But he was alive. When Lorne reached him, her sobs echoed off the stone, raw and unrestrained, a sound of pure relief, the release of weeks spent braced against terror. The moment didn't last. Below them, hoofbeats rolled through the canyon like a rock slide. Rowan moved to the mouth of the cave, peering down through the brush. 6 riders, he said, his voice level. Lockridge cutters. They're following the blood, Rowan said quietly. They know he's alive. They were trapped. The cave narrowed into a stone throat with no exit except the way they'd come. The canyon wall above them rose sheer and unforgiving, no chance of climbing it with a wounded man. Give me the gun, Lorne Avery said. Rowan Pike turned. She was holding Silas Crow's heavy service revolver. Her face was drained of color, streaked with dust and dried tears, but her hands didn't shake. She wasn't asking permission. She was readying herself for a fight. I won't let them take him, she said, her voice low but unyielding. I won't. The first shot cracked through the canyon, stone splintering inches from Rowan's head. The riders below had seen them. They scattered for cover behind boulders at the base of the slope, rifles flashing in the harsh afternoon light. A voice drifted up, amused and cruel. Send down the surveyor, Ghost. Maybe we let the girl live long enough to regret coming out here. Rowan set an arrow, muscles tightening like drawn wire. He leaned out and released. A man below screamed as the arrow tore into his shoulder. Arrows whispered, rifles roared. The return fire slammed into the cave mouth, bullets whining off stone, driving them back into shadow. They were pinned. Time was against them. Rowan had the high ground, but Bram Lockridge's men had superior firepower. He looked at Lorne, then at Silas, unconscious again in the corner. His gaze dropped to his bow, then to the Winchester rifle lying near the cave entrance, abandoned by the North Spur surveyors. A weapon of war. He couldn't touch it. The vow he'd sworn 10 years earlier pressed hard against his chest. The promise never again to be the hand that delivered death. To lift that rifle was to admit the soldier's ghost still lived inside him. "Rowan!" Lorne screamed. One of the gunmen had circled wide. He was climbing the rocks to the left, unseen until now. He raised his pistol, not at Rowan, but at her. Lorne saw him. She didn't freeze. In a flash of desperate, brilliant instinct, she didn't aim for the man she knew she'd miss. She swung the revolver upward and fired at a shelf of shale balanced above his head. The rock shattered. The ledge gave way with a thunderous roar, cascading down the slope. The gunman shouted as he lost his footing, tumbling backward in a cloud of dust. It was reckless, it was fearless, and it exposed her. From the valley floor, the leader of the riders stepped out from cover, a tall figure in a long duster. He raised his rifle, sighting in on Lorne as she turned, already too late to duck. He had a clear line on Lorne Avery as she steadied herself from the recoil. Time thinned to a crawl. Rowan Pike saw everything at once. The gunman's finger tightening, Lorne turning, her eyes flaring as she realized she was too slow to duck. He saw her ending, already written in the cold ring of a rifle barrel. In that sliver of a second, the vow broke. Rowan didn't think. He didn't count the cost. He moved. The bow fell from his hand. The same hand that split firewood and hauled a woman from a river seized the Winchester from the dirt. Wood and steel came up to his shoulder, the weight nauseatingly familiar, fitting him like a limb reclaimed. The sights lined. The world narrowed to one point. The wind, the distance, the bullets drop. Everything he had buried surged back with brutal clarity. He didn't breathe. He became the stillness between heartbeats. Crack. The report cut sharper than the others, clean and final. Below, the gunman's rifle flew free. The man folded. The threat ended before the echo returned from the canyon walls. The rest of the Lockridge cutters, seeing their leader fall to a shot that felt impossible, a ghost's shot, panicked. They fired wild and scrambled for their horses, fleeing hard toward Deadwood. Silence rushed in, louder than the gunfire. Lorne pressed herself to the cave wall, chest heaving, the revolver slack in her fingers. She looked down to the valley floor, then up to Rowan. He stood at the cave mouth, rifle still raised. Slowly, he lowered it. The Winchester clattered against stone. Then he began to shake. It started in his hands, climbed his arms, took him whole, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. He dropped to his knees, gasping, clutching his chest as if his heart were trying to break free. He stared at his hands in horror. The vow was broken. The monster was back. He waited for the dark to swallow him. He didn't hear Lorne move. He only felt her. She didn't cheer. She didn't praise the shot. She didn't look at the dead man below. She knelt beside him in the dust and wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders. "I'm sorry," he choked, voice in pieces, tears carving tracks through the grit on his face. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." She held him the way you hold a child waking from a nightmare. "You didn't kill for hate, Rowan," she said, steady and close. "You chose to protect." She pressed her words fiercely into his hair. "You didn't kill for a flag or a general. You saved me. Do you hear me? You saved me!" He tried to pull back, ashamed of the weakness shaking through him, ashamed that she had seen the killer he believed lived inside his chest. But she refused to release him. She held him through the tremors, through the ragged breaths, until the shaking broke apart, and finally stilled. In that cave, thick with gunpowder smoke and the scent of ancient dust, they found the deepest intimacy two people can share. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't skin against skin. It was the act of being seen at one's worst and not being turned away from. Lorne held the man who believed himself a monster, and in her arms, Rowan Pike understood something he had never allowed before. The gun hadn't saved her. He had. And for the first time in 10 years, the ghost loosened its grip, fading until only a man remained, crying, breathing, alive, and loved. The ride back to Deadwood wasn't an escape. It was a procession. They moved at a measured pace, the canyon's fury draining into the steady ache of survival. When they finally rode down the main street, the town was only just stirring. The mud lay frozen in deep ruts. The air carried wood smoke and the bitter scent of morning coffee. But for Lorne and Rowan, the world had already changed. They didn't storm the marshal's office with drawn guns. That was the fantasy of dime novels. Instead, Lorne Avery walked in with the precise calm of a woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because she carried the maps. She laid the papers across Marshal Orson Bale's desk, the geological surveys, the forged deeds, the letters bearing Bram Lockridge's name, ordering the erasure of the North Spur surveyors. The marshal, the same man who had told her to return to embroidery, looked from the documents to Lorne, then to the scarred man standing silent at the door like a sentinel. He said nothing. He reached for his hat and his keys. Lockridge didn't fall in a noonday duel. He fell to the truth, carefully preserved by a woman who refused to let history be rewritten by power. Silas Crow was safe, weak, his leg shattered but alive. He was placed under the care of Dr. Amos Reedon, and the telegraph lines hummed with word of his rescue all the way to Boston. Then the noise settled, and quiet returned. The days that followed blurred together. Statements taken, wounds stitched, plans made. Deadwood, which had once treated Lorne as a nuisance and Rowan as a ghost, now watched them with a cautious, reverent silence. As Silas regained strength, another question gathered above them, dark and inevitable, hanging like a storm cloud that had not yet broken. What came next lingered like an unanswered question. Lorne Avery belonged to a world of gas lamps, paved streets, and lecture halls. Rowan Pike belonged to wind and quiet, to a life measured by terrain and weather. By every sensible rule, their paths had crossed. Nothing more. On the morning Lorne was set to leave, the sky stretched above Deadwood in a brilliant, aching blue. In her boarding house room, she folded the gray wool dress now marked by the black hills. Her trunk stood open. Her ticket lay on the dresser. Each item she packed felt weighted, as if she were sealing away a part of herself she had only just found. Floorboards creaked in the hall. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Rowan stood in the doorway. He had scrubbed away dust and blood, his skin clean, his shirt freshly washed and pulled tight across his shoulders. He held his hat in both hands, turning the brim slowly. His dark eyes lingered on the open trunk. For a long moment, neither spoke. They had faced rifles and freezing water. This farewell, was the hardest ground yet. "Your brother," Rowan said at last, his voice rough. "The doctor says he can travel." "Yes," Lorne answered, her words taut. "He wants to see the ocean again." Rowan nodded. His gaze drifted to the window, then down to his boots. Finally, he stepped forward. From his pocket, he drew a small object and placed it gently in her palm. It was a carving, a bird shaped from smooth cedar. Not flawless. One wing dipped slightly lower than the other. But it was caught mid-flight, rising. Hours by the fire lived in that piece of wood. Hours spent choosing to make rather than destroy. "A meadowlark," he said quietly. "You said you liked their song." Lorne closed her fingers around it. The wood was warm from his pocket. "It's beautiful, Rowan." He drew a breath that snagged in his chest. "The stagecoach leaves in an hour." "It does," she whispered. "Boston is safe. It has order. It has my father's books." She looked up, searching his face for a sign, for a reason to stay. "Boston has libraries," she said softly. Rowan met her gaze. He saw the woman who had held his hand while he confessed his sins, the woman who had saved him, not with a gun, but with forgiveness. He stepped closer, filling the small room with his presence. "The West has stories," he said. He reached out, his calloused thumb brushing the tear from her cheek with a gentleness that surprised them both. "I don't want to live in a story that doesn't have you in it." The trunk was never closed. The ticket was never used. Lorne Avery did not return to Boston. She sent Silas Crow east with love and a promise to write. But she stayed where the ground could be read like a page and the sky stretched wide and honest. She and Rowan Pike didn't disappear into legend. They built something real. On the edge of town, where the forest met the road, they opened a trading post. It sold furs and flour, yes, but in the back room it became something rarer, a place where a trapper might buy a skinning knife and a volume of Shakespeare in the same breath. They worked shoulder to shoulder. Rowan, the man of few words, learned to laugh. Lorne, the woman of letters, learned to listen to the wind. They were partners in every sense. They argued, they planned, they built, they aged. They didn't have a fairy tale. Those end at weddings or with dragons slain. Life kept going. What they had was better than a fairy tale. They had winters so cold the fire needed feeding every hour, summers so dry the garden cracked. They had long nights and hard days. And through it all, they carried the memory of the cave and the vow they never spoke aloud, made not with words, but with the way they lived. They chose each other. Not once, on a dramatic day in 1876, but every morning when they woke. That was the ending that mattered. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment. And thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.